environment. So the agenda I have for you today is, first I want to discuss type 2 diabetes with you. And we're going to look at commercial trials and the treatment of type 2 diabetes, non-commercial trials, and then I would like to round up what I have in mind. Type 2 diabetes, it is a global problem. 382 million adults, that's 8.3% of the population worldwide, have this condition. And what's even worse is that it's projected to rise to more than 592 million by the year 2035. 80% of the cases are occurring now in low-income and middle-income countries. If you look at the Russian diabetes population, I have been informed that it has increased by 20% in 5 years. That's a lot. And diabetes has become a major cause of death in people younger than 60 years of age. So this is a huge problem. The reason why I think that cardiologists and cardiac surgeons or people interested in cardiovascular medicine need to get involved in trials regarding type 2 diabetes is because that the condition has a 2 to 4-fold higher risk of cardiovascular disease even after adjustment for established cardiovascular risk factors. And there is a problem that guidelines worldwide focus on optimization of HbA1c. In other words, it's the treat the sugar paradigm that I think is flawed. And no trial results have shown cardiovascular risk reduction with glucose lowering. That is also very important because in diabetes trials, what everybody goes after is to treat the sugar. If you look at this, then you can see that the red bars, they are conventional glycemic, 12,000 patients. The red bar shows conventional glycemic control, and the blue bars intensify glycemic control. Look at coronary heart disease, no real benefit of intensified glycemic control. It goes for stroke 2, blindness, renal impairment, all-cause mortality, no major difference. The only place where there is a real difference is in cases of severe hypoglycemia. And hypoglycemia, ladies and gentlemen, is not a condition that's of benefit for anyone at all. What is type 2 diabetes? That's also become an important issue. And here you can see Edwin Gale's approach to what type 2 diabetes is. He thinks of it as a category error. And a category error that occurs when we assign a problem to a category inappropriate to its solution. In other words, we speak of it as diabetes, and that is a problem with high blood glucose. But that doesn't seem to be the case. You should instead call it idiopathic hyperglycemia. And it's hardly a disease in its own right. There's a problem that a unitary disease concept has failed to achieve satisfactory management of type 2 diabetes and its associated risks, mainly the cardiovascular risks. And type 2 diabetes is an outcome of network processes contributing to the affluent phenotype. That's why it's on the rise in developing countries. And the phenotype is adiposity, hypertension, hyperglycemia, hyperlipidemia, cardiovascular disease, and cancer, and stroke as well. So this affluent phenotype should be viewed in dynamic rather than static terms and as adaptation rather than disease. It's true that obesogenic environment drives the increased prevalence of type 2 diabetes. There's a change in human societies that has altered food production worldwide. Resource-intensive animal husbandry has increased, as has the further refinement of grains. And other changes in society have promoted urbanization with greater access to highly processed, energy-dense food, sugary drinks not least, and decreased physical activity. This slide shows the score, indicates availability of sugar, meat, animal products, and so forth. These are Western countries typically. And here you see Asian countries that are on the rise. The type 2 diabetes epidemic is most pronounced in Asian countries. And that's because they are changing, among other things, their diet and their livelihood. Now I'd like to talk to you about the commercial trials and treatment of type 2 diabetes. Let's look at the insulin market, because the way that the pharmaceutical companies want us to treat type 2 diabetes is with long-acting insulin analogs. Look at the global insulin market, worth a fortune, $12 billion in 2011. And by 2018, it's projected to increase to the level of $32 billion. And the Chinese market alone will have an impact of 10%. But we must remember that analogs, insulin analogs, they are only modified delivery systems, and insulin is only insulin. So, is this a benefit for the patient? There's a problem with drug trials for regulatory purposes in diabetes. They are short-term, they are usually in selected populations, and the majority of trials to date are on elderly Caucasians receiving diabetes care. Trials are focused on surrogate biomarkers for efficacy rather than hard outcomes. And that's the main topic of this talk, actually, so I'll return to that. They focus on HbA1c control, but not mortality, cardiovascular adverse events, blindness, and amputation, which is the true problems that people with diabetes face. The trials are also all open label, incredible, open label, non-inferiority, and last observation carried forward. Actually, not very impressive. And then what the drug companies typically go for is convenience. For instance, that you only need to inject yourself once a day. It does not look at more patient-important endpoints. Something very interesting occurred in 2008. The US Food and Drug Administration looked, and that was because of a major scandal that occurred at that time, actually also with the COX-2 inhibitors, that it was appreciated that type 2 diabetes really increases the risks for cardiovascular events to a very large extent. So the US FDA went in and said that you could only have a drug approved if there should be a limited cardiovascular risk between 1.3 and 1.8. And if that was the case, then further post-marketing safety studies would be required. Unfortunately, data still do not have to show benefit in hard endpoints, but rather that harm is limited. And what's incredible, in my view, is that the European medicines agencies, they have not initiated such a requirement as yet. The FDA did this in 2008. So what has that meant? Well, that has meant, of course, that the cumulative number of participants in cardiovascular outcome trials has increased dramatically. Here from 2008, this was the FDA's initiative, and now you see the rise in cardiovascular trials. And this is the projection of how far it will go. But the cardiovascular requirements, they have led to a design culture of risk avoidance, again, rather than looking at hard endpoints. They are mostly simple, placebo-controlled, again, non-inferiority designs, aiming to show a comparative absence of composite cardiovascular toxicity with usual diabetes care. Drug-naive are pre-treated with any anti-diabetic background or medication, and there is no embedded head-to-head comparison. And the aim is to satisfy regulatory requirements in the shortest possible time using composite cardiovascular endpoints. And that's a problem, of course. Because what about composite endpoints? Well, of course, a higher number of events is expected during the trial. Then it becomes smaller, less costly, and faster to do. But you should be cautioned about composite endpoints, because if less important so-called soft outcomes account for the majority of the events, then you can have a positive outcome. What are soft endpoints here? That would be something like unstable angina, which no one is able to define. So if a composite endpoint is hard, the distribution of single outcome is of lower importance, of course. That should be then death, myocardial infarction, and stroke. That would be a fine composite endpoint, actually. So we urgently need a remedy for commercial trials in type 2 diabetes. It needs to be quality by design. Clinical outcomes, not surrogates, should be the primary endpoints. And enrollment with real-world settings across different countries is important. Then there should be a long-term follow-up, because cardiovascular events don't occur from day to day. And to motivate companies to invest in long-term trials, financial incentives such as offering a longer patient life could be considered, of course. Non-commercial trials, I won't say that much about that, just that there are major knowledge gaps in the dietary management of diabetes. There is scant applied evidence for what works in diets and little condemnation of what does not work. Larger and longer trials are needed to compare relative efficacy and effectiveness of various dietary approaches in diabetes management. And then personalized nutrition therapy tailored according to individuals' metabolic profile or genetic background. Just think of the rising numbers of type 2 diabetes in Asia is a promising concept, but yet to be investigated at all. Rounding up, I have the following points. Most ongoing cardiovascular outcome trials are being carried out in populations at high cardiovascular risk who have had type 2 diabetes for many years. This, of course, could limit the trial's ability to assess treatments that might be more effective for primary cardiovascular disease prevention and identifying potentially greater benefits of intervention earlier in the progression of diabetes. Drug development program outcomes must be changed from surrogate, and here this HbA1c, to patient-relevant hard endpoints. That would be something like cardiovascular events, avoidance of vision loss, renal failure, erectile dysfunction, amputation. Again, using prospective double-blinded design. Development of insulin analogs should be changed from the current non-inferiority open-label treat-to-target design to prospective randomized double-blinded studies with patient-relevant hard endpoints. Enrollment of patients should be within real-world settings across different countries, taking patient age and ethnicity into account. And if composite endpoints are used, the included endpoints must all be hard endpoints. That we have discussed already. Studies of hard endpoints have to be done during rather than after drug development, adding to both costs and durations of the trials. This will require trials of substantially longer duration, and to achieve this, drug companies may have to be compensated. That I have also spoken to you about already. Well, this is more philosophical. We tend to become lost in the world of immediacy, wanting instant and quick gratification and results. In the context of type 2 diabetes, this is reflected by fast food consumption, countered by fast drug development. Not a very good combination. That's not the way forward. The strongest trees grow the slowest. I think that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.